50,000 years. That's how long the line held. No army patrolled it. No treaty enforced it. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl even when you're standing alone in an empty room. Every species that ever charted this galaxy learned one rule before they learned anything else. Don't cross into human territory. Not because anyone knew what was waiting on the other side, because nobody who tried ever lived to tell the story. Then, on an ordinary patrol nobody thought twice about, one fleet crossed the line and the galaxy went quiet again. Out on the rim of known space, there's a stretch of stars that traders mark in red on every navigation chart in the galaxy. Not because there's danger there, because there's nothing there. No signals, no outposts, no wreckage. Just a border drawn 50,000 years ago that nobody alive had ever seen crossed. The Calith Compact ran half the galaxy's trade routes. They'd built empires, fought wars, buried civilizations under the weight of their fleets. But even the Calith, arrogant as they came, kept a full light year of buffer between their patrols and that red line. It was law. It was instinct. It was the one thing every species agreed on without ever needing to discuss it twice. Commander Vren Talis didn't believe in ghost stories. He was 30 years into a career built on hard math and harder discipline, and he ran the Solace Vanguard A Euro, a scout-class cruiser with a crew of 40 and a reputation for boring, uneventful patrols. That's exactly how he liked it. His navigator, a young officer named E.O. Pell, was fresh out of the academy and still had that itch every rookie gets a Euros, the one that makes rules feel like suggestions. She'd grown up on stories about the line. Everybody had. Humans, the stories said, vanished from the galactic stage 50,000 years back, right after some war nobody had records of. They didn't die out. They didn't leave. They just stopped talking. And whatever they left behind that border was still working, still watching, still enforcing a peace nobody remembered agreeing to. It's probably automated buoys, Io said one shift, scrolling through outdated survey data. Old defense drones nobody bothered decommissioning. That's it. That's the big scary secret. Talis didn't answer right away. He'd seen the sensor logs from ships that got close over the centuries, a year readings that made no sense. Gravity wells that shouldn't exist, and then nothing. No wreckage, no debris fields. Ships just stopped transmitting, like someone had reached out and turned off a light switch. Maybe, he finally said. Or maybe some rules exist because the people who broke them aren't around to argue about it. Neither of them knew that within 6 hours, their next assignment would put the Solace Vanguard on a routine resupply run of Euros, one that clipped the edge of that red line by less than 400 kilometers. A rounding error, a shortcut to save fuel. The kind of decision made 1,000 times a day across 1,000 different fleets. This time, someone was watching. The order came down from Compact Fleet Command, buried in a stack of routine logistics. Reroute the Solace Vanguard and 2 escort frigates through the Halvan Corridor to resupply a mining colony running dangerously low on fuel cells. Standard mission. Except the fastest path through the corridor shaved a corner off human territory Euros, barely a sliver, 400 kilometers deep at most. Talis flagged it immediately. Send it back through proper channels. We go around. Going around adds 11 hours, said his XO, a broad-shouldered officer named Dresk. Command's already approved the shortcut. Half the fleets have done it before, sir. Nobody so much as clips that line and gets a scratch. It's an old wives' tale at this point. That part was true, technically. Ships had shaved corners for decades. Nothing ever happened. The stories always talked about ships that went deep a Euros, ships that tried to explore, to map, to loot whatever secrets humanity left behind. A 400-kilometer clip on the edge? That wasn't crossing into human territory. That was barely touching the doormat. Talis still didn't like it. 30 years of instinct told him rules like that didn't get followed by an entire galaxy for 50,000 years over nothing. But orders were orders, and fuel was fuel, and somewhere on that mining colony there were 400 people running out of both food and options. Fine, he said. Minimum depth, maximum speed. Nobody so much as breathes wrong out there. The Solace Vanguard and its 2 escorts adjusted course. EO ran the numbers twice, then a third time, checking and double-checking the corridor depth like she could will it to be smaller. It didn't help the knot in her stomach. She'd spent her whole childhood hearing bedtime stories about the line from her grandmother, an old freight pilot who swore she'd seen a ship vanish off long-range scanners decades back a Euros. No explosion, no debris, just a signal that cut mid-sentence and never came back. You've gone quiet, Talis said, watching her at the nav station. Just running the math again, she said. It'll be fine, in and out. Barely even a footnote. 6 hours later, the 3 ships entered the corridor. The first 2 hours passed in total silence. The kind of silence Thales had learned to trust, the boring kind. The kind that meant nothing was going wrong. Then every sensor screen on the bridge flickered at once, and the temperature on the ship dropped 4 degrees in under a second. Thales, Dresk said, voice tight. Something's reading our hull. The reading wasn't a weapon lock. It wasn't a communications ping either. It was something in between euros, a pulse that swept across the Solace Vanguard from bow to stern, gentle as a hand running down a spine, and then gone. Every system on the ship registered it, and then immediately reported nothing wrong. No damage. No radiation spike. No trace of a source. Diangstick Thales snapped. Clean, said the engineering officer, sweat already on his brow. Everything's green, sir. But that pulse euro, it read us. Hull thickness, crew count, engine output. It read us like a full ship scan compressed into 1/10 of a second. Io's hands hovered over the nav controls, frozen. Sir, I'm not picking up a source. No ships, no station, no drone signature. It's like the scan came from empty space. Thales had spent 3 decades learning to trust his gut over his instruments, and right now his gut was screaming louder than every alarm on the bridge combined. Reverse course. Full burn. Exit the corridor the way we came in. The order came half a second too late. The lead escort frigate, the Corin's Pride, went dark first. Not an explosion, not a distress call cut short. Every light on that ship simply turned off at once, engines included, drifting dead in space like it had never been alive to begin with. Corin's Pride, respond, Dresk barked into the comm. Nothing, not static, not silence with texture, a total clean absence, like the frequency itself had been switched off. The second frigate broke formation, engines flaring as its captain made the same call Thales was screaming into his own comm system, Euro, get out. Now, don't ask questions, just run. It didn't matter. 30 seconds later, that ship went dark too, mid-turn, frozen in a half-completed maneuver like a photograph. Thales, whatever this is, it's hurting us, Dresk said, real fear cracking through his professional calm for the first time in years of service together. It let those 2 ships go dead without firing a single shot we could detect. We're next. Thales stared at the black scope where his escort ships used to be, 2 neat blips replaced by silence. Every instinct in him said run, and every fact in front of him said running hadn't saved anyone yet. Io, he said, forcing his voice level for the sake of his crew. Send everything we've got back to Compact Command. Every sensor log, every reading, every last second we have left. Sending now, sir. The transmission got out 11 seconds before the Solace Vanguard went dark to Euro's engines, lights, weapons, all of it Euro's, mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-breath. And then, 40 seconds later, that transmission cut off too. Just like all the stories said it would. 3 days later, a joint Calith compact investigation team dropped out of warp at the edge of the Halvan corridor, keeping a very respectful 2 light-years back from the actual border. Admiral Ressa Korvan commanded the operation personally, Euros, not because she wanted to, but because losing 3 ships and 40-plus crew without a single shot fired was the kind of disaster that ended careers. And she intended to have answers before anyone above her started asking questions she couldn't answer. Play the last transmission again, she ordered. The bridge crew replayed it. Thales's voice, tight but steady, reading off sensor data. Then Io's voice underneath, confirming the send. Then 11 seconds of ambient noise, Euro, a beep, someone's breathing, the low hum of engines, Euro, before the recording cut, hard like scissors through film. No explosion, said her sensor chief. A Calith officer named Dost. No energy discharge, no debris. Whatever hit those 3 ships didn't destroy them. It just turned them off. Ships don't just turn off, Corvain said. No, Admiral, they don't. Dost pulled up the last clean sensor reading before the blackout, Euro, the mysterious pulse that had swept the Solace Vanguard, seconds before it lost contact. But this reading right here, this scanning pulse, I've cross-referenced it against every database the Compact has, going back 300 years. There's one match. One. He pulled up an old, badly degraded file, Euros, a report filed by a long-dead trade envoy nearly 2 centuries earlier, describing an almost identical pulse detected near the edge of human territory before contact was lost with a survey ship. The report had been dismissed at the time as sensor error. Nobody had believed it. Nobody wanted to believe a border 50,000 years old was still actively enforced by something that could disable a warship without firing a shot. So it's real, Corvain said quietly. It's still there. Whatever they built, It's still running. There's something else, Admiral. Dost's voice dropped. I ran a deep scan on the corridor itself, using the long-range arrays from our position. I'm not detecting any weapons platforms, any stations, any fleet presence at all inside human territory. As far as our instruments are concerned, there's nothing there. No lights. No power signatures. No ships. Then Hawa. That's what scares me, Admiral. However this happened, it wasn't a fleet defending its border. It was something else. Something that doesn't need ships to do this to us. Corvain stared at the dead black feed where the Solace Vanguard used to transmit, thinking about the 40-plus families back home who were about to receive the worst news of their lives over a fuel run that clipped a border by 400 kilometers. Send word to the Compact Council, she finally said. Tell them the old stories were true. And tell them we are not a Euro, under any circumstances a Euro, sending another ship into that corridor until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. She didn't know it yet. But that decision would turn out to be the only smart choice anyone made in this entire disaster. The Compact Council didn't listen. 3 weeks after Admiral Corvain's report reached the capital, a closed-door session convened with representatives from 6 major species, all of them staring at the same data and reaching 6 different conclusions. Some wanted to quarantine the entire sector and pretend the line had never been touched. Others, led by a hardline Kalith delegate named Barris Oldvek, saw something else entirely, an opportunity. 40 years ago, we mapped the edges of human territory using long-range sensors and found nothing, Barris argued, pacing in front of the holographic display. No fleets, no orbital defenses, no population centers we could detect. If humanity truly vanished a Euros, if there's genuinely nothing left inside that border but old automated systems running on borrowed time a Euros, then we are looking at the single largest unclaimed territory in the known galaxy. We lost 3 ships to some ancient defense grid. Yes, that's a tragedy. It is not a reason to abandon an opportunity like this. Corvain, present via HoloLink, felt her stomach turn. With respect, Delegate, we don't understand what disabled those ships. We don't know if it was a defense grid, a weapon, or something we don't have a word for yet. Recommending further incursion into that territory right now isn't opportunity, it's suicide. Then we send something expendable first, Barris said. A reconnaissance drone swarm. No crew, no risk to compact lives, and we finally get real data instead of ghost stories and dead transmissions. The vote wasn't close. 5 species in favor, 1 a Euro, Corvain's own delegation a Euro opposed. 3 days later, a swarm of 42 autonomous recon drones launched from a staging platform just outside the border, programmed to slip a full 200 kilometers into human territory, gather every scrap of data they could, and retreat before anything could touch them. 31 seconds after crossing the line, every single drone went dark simultaneously, not staggered, not gradual. All 42 at the exact same instant, as if a single switch somewhere had been thrown. But this time, one piece of data made it back before the blackout of Euros. A single frame of visual sensor footage, badly compressed, transmitted in the half-second window before the drone lost power. It showed nothing dramatic. No fleet, no weapon, just open space, stars, and a strange geometric shimmer at the very edge of the frame, like a heat distortion where there shouldn't be any heat at all. Dust stared at that frame for 6 straight hours before he said the words. Nobody on the science team wanted to hear out loud. That's not a malfunction pattern, he said. That's a cloaked object. And based on the scale distortion around it, whatever that object is, it's enormous. Something had been watching those drones the entire 31 seconds. Something big enough to bend light around itself. And it had let all 42 drones get close enough to see it before shutting every one of them down at exactly the same moment. That wasn't automated defense behavior. That was a decision. To understand what was waiting behind that line, the Compact's historians had to go back further than any living record could reach a Euros, all the way to the fragmented, half-mythical accounts of the war that drew that border in the first place. 50,000 years ago, humanity wasn't a legend. They were a young species, barely out of their own solar system, still arguing among themselves about politics and borders, and who got to lead. And for a brief, brutal stretch of galactic history, an ancient alliance of older, more established species decided that a species so young, so fast-growing, and so aggressively curious about the stars didn't deserve a seat at the table. They decided to remove the problem before it grew any further. The war that followed didn't have a name that survived into modern records of Euros. Most of the alliance that started, it didn't survive to write one. What the old fragments agreed on was this: humanity, cornered, outnumbered, and staring down annihilation, didn't break. They adapted faster than anyone thought possible, turned captured technology against the very species who'd built it, and fought a war of complete and total desperation for nearly 2 centuries. By the end of it, the alliance that started the war didn't exist anymore. Not because humanity wiped them out in some act of vengeance, but because those species had bled themselves dry, trying and failing to finish what they started, while humanity kept adapting, kept building, kept surviving in ways nobody could predict or counter. And then, at the height of their power Euros, standing over the ashes of an alliance that had tried to erase them Euros, humanity did something nobody expected. They stopped. They didn't chase down every surviving remnant. They didn't expand outward to claim the territory they'd won by right of survival. They drew a line, told the rest of the galaxy exactly where it was, and went quiet. No demands, no terms, no conquest. Just a border, and an implicit promise: stay on your side and this ends here. For 50,000 years, every species smart enough to survive that long simply chose to believe them. They won a war that should have ended them, Corvain said quietly, reading the compiled historical fragments alongside Dost late one night. And instead of taking everything, they just walked away and locked the door behind them. That's not the part that worries me, Dost said. The part that worries me is this: a Euro, if that's what they did after winning a war for their own survival, restraint, silence, drawing a line and simply enforcing it without a single act of aggression beyond their own border for 50,000 years. What does it take to make something like that finally act? Neither of them had an answer. But 3 weeks later, they were about to find out. It came without warning, on every frequency the compact used across the entire sector, in every major language spoken by every species that had ever crossed paths with the galaxy's trade routes. No ship delivered it. No station transmitted it first. It simply appeared everywhere all at once, as if it had always been there and someone had just decided it was time to turn the volume up. There was no visual, no fleet displayed in a show of force. Just a voice, a Euro calm, measured, unmistakably human, a Euro, speaking words that would be replayed, translated, and argued over for the rest of galactic history. For 50,000 years, the terms were simple: stay on your side of the line, and we stay on ours. No ship crossed into your territory. No weapon was ever fired beyond our border. We kept our word for 500 centuries, even when some of you forgot it was a promise and started treating it like a rumor. 3 ships crossed into our territory carrying crews who made an honest mistake under bad orders. They were identified, disabled, and their crews are alive, unharmed, and currently in our custody. 42 drones crossed our territory carrying no crew and no honest excuse Euros. They were sent deliberately, to test us, by people in a council chamber who decided our silence meant our absence. We want to be very clear about something. 50,000 years of quiet was never weakness, it was patience. We are done being patient with people who mistake one for the other. The message ended there, no further explanation, no demands, no ultimatum Euros, just silence again, heavier than before. Across a dozen capital worlds, emergency councils convened within the hour. Barris Old Vec, the delegate who'd pushed for the drone incursion, found himself facing an emergency inquiry from his own government before the day was over. His career effectively over before he'd said a single word in his own defense. Corvain watched the message a third time, focusing on one detail nobody else seemed to catch. They said the crews are alive, she said to Dost. Unharmed. In custody. That's what caught my attention too, Dost said. They didn't kill them. They had every reason to, by any measure any other species in this galaxy would use, and they chose not to. That's not the behavior of something that's angry. That's the behavior of something that's still, even now, trying to be reasonable. For how much longer, though? Corvain asked, and neither of them had an answer worth saying out loud. Commander Tallis woke up in a room with no bars, no restraints, and no obvious way to tell how much time had passed. The air smelled clean, faintly like rain on stone, and the lighting was soft enough that his eyes adjusted without pain. For a long moment he just lay there, running a mental damage check on himself the same way he'd run one on his ship 100 times before. No injuries, no restraints, just a bed, a chair, and a door that didn't look locked. Io was awake in the room next to his. He found out within the hour, along with the rest of both crews Euros, all 40 plus of them, alive, unharmed, confused, and being treated with a level of careful, almost clinical politeness that none of them expected from something that had disabled 3 warships without breaking a sweat. A man walked in, eventually a Euros. No uniform Talos recognized, no rank insignia, nothing that screamed military. Just a calm, unhurried presence that immediately put Talos on edge more than any show of force could have. "You're not going to be harmed," the man said, without preamble. "You made a navigational shortcut based on orders you were given, not a decision to invade anyone's territory. We know the difference. Command staff will be debriefed, and then all of you will be returned home." "Just like that?" Talos said, testing the words carefully. "Just like that." The man studied him for a moment. "You want to know why? I want to know a lot of things. That's a decent starting point. 50,000 years ago, we fought a war we didn't start, against people who decided we didn't deserve to exist just because we hadn't been around as long as they had. We won that war the hard way, Euros, by refusing to stop adapting, refusing to stop fighting, and refusing to die when everyone expected us to. When it ended, we had a choice. Take everything, because we'd earned the right to surviving. Or draw a line, and prove that surviving didn't mean we'd become the thing that tried to erase us." Talos said nothing, listening. "We chose the line," the man continued. "For 50,000 years, we kept it, even when it cost us the chance to expand, to trade, to be known. Because the alternative was becoming exactly what almost killed us. Your mistake didn't threaten that promise, Commander. It just reminded us we still have to enforce it sometimes." "And the drones? The ones sent on purpose?" The man's expression didn't change, but something in his voice went flatter, quieter, more final. "That's a different conversation. And it's one we're currently having with your council, not with you." He left without another word, and Talos sat alone in that quiet, comfortable room, understanding for the first time exactly what kind of silence humanity had been keeping for 50,000 years a Euros, and exactly how much restraint it had taken to keep it that long. 3 days after the message aired across the galaxy, the Compact Council received a private transmission with a single set of coordinates and a simple instruction: send 1 unarmed diplomatic vessel, no escorts, no weapons, to receive the returned crews and hear final terms in person. Admiral Corvain volunteered before anyone could suggest someone else. Her ship crossed into human territory under careful, monitored escort a Euros. Not by warships, she realized as her sensors slowly came back online after the border crossing, but by something far stranger. No fleet greeted her. No orbital stations lit up her scanners. The corridor looked exactly as empty as it always had on every long-range survey the Compact had ever run. Then her sensors adjusted, recalibrated by systems she didn't recognize and hadn't authorized, and the emptiness resolved into something that made her stop breathing for a full 3 seconds. They weren't gone. They'd never been gone. What every species in the galaxy had spent 50,000 years reading as empty space was, in reality, a fleet so thoroughly camouflaged, so completely integrated into the natural background of the corridor, that not one sensor sweep in 500 centuries had ever registered it as anything but stars and static. Hundreds of vessels, spread across a formation that stretched further than her instruments could fully map in one pass, sat silent and dark and utterly still a Euros, not because they were abandoned, but because they were exactly where they'd always been, watching a border they'd apparently never once stopped watching. "My God," Corvain said out loud, to no one. A single ship detached from that impossible formation and escorted her the rest of the way to a station she hadn't detected until she was almost on top of it. The crews from the Solace Vanguard and its 2 escorts were waiting there, alive, healthy, and visibly relieved to see a familiar face. Talos met her at the airlock personally. "Admiral," he said, "there's something you need to understand before you sit down with them." "I think I'm starting to," Corvain said, still shaken from what she'd seen on approach. "They didn't disappear 50,000 years ago," Talos said. "They just stopped announcing themselves. Every ship, every station, every soldier a Euros, still here, still watching, still exactly as strong as they were the day they won that war. The whole galaxy built its entire understanding of the balance of power on the assumption that humanity was gone, or weak, or a myth. And the truth." Talos looked back toward that impossible fleet, silent and patient, and utterly unshaken by 50,000 years of being underestimated. "The truth, Admiral, is that we've been living next door to the single most powerful, most disciplined military force in the galaxy this entire time. And the only reason it never mattered is because they never once wanted it to. The final terms weren't complicated, and that, more than anything, unsettled the council delegates who received them. No reparations demanded. No territorial expansion. No ultimatum wrapped in threats. Just 3 simple conditions, delivered in the same calm voice that had addressed the entire galaxy weeks earlier. The 3 crews would be returned home immediately, no conditions attached, their mistake fully forgiven as an honest accident of bad orders, and a shortcut that cost more than anyone intended. The Compact Council would issue a formal, permanent order to every species under its authority, redefining the border with updated coordinates, and a warning clear enough that no future council could pretend the old stories were exaggeration. And Barris Old Vec, the delegate who'd ordered the drone incursion as a deliberate test, would face judgment not from humanity, but from his own government, because as the message pointedly noted, humanity had no interest in punishing anyone outside its own border. That responsibility belonged to the people who'd sent those drones in the first place. That's it? One delegate asked during the final council session, disbelief plain in her voice. After everything, after the ships, the drones, the message that shook 6 species to their core, that's the entire demand? Redraw a border we already knew about and hold our own people accountable? Corvain, present for the vote, understood something the delegate clearly didn't. That's not a small demand, she said. That's the whole point. They're not asking us to fear them. They're asking us to respect a line they've kept perfectly for 50,000 years, without once needing to remind anyone it existed. The fact that we forgot doesn't mean they did. The vote passed unanimously. Within a month, every navigation chart across compact space carried updated coordinates for the human border, marked now not just in red, but with a formal council warning translated into every major language spoken across a dozen worlds a Euros. A warning built on updated intelligence instead of half-remembered folklore. Commander Tallis returned to active duty eventually, though he requested, and received permanent reassignment away from anything resembling border patrol. Some things a person only needs to learn once. Io stayed in the service too, though she spent the rest of her career quietly making sure every young navigator under her command understood exactly why that red line on the chart wasn't a suggestion. And out on the edge of known space, in a corridor that looked, to every sensor in the galaxy, like nothing but empty stars and old static, a fleet that had never once stopped watching went back to doing exactly what it had done for 50,000 years before that one ordinary Tuesday. It waited, patient, silent, unshaken, exactly as strong as the day it won a war that should have ended it a Euros, and exactly as restrained as the promise it made the moment that war was over. Some lines get crossed once, by mistake. They only ever get crossed on purpose, by anyone with sense exactly 0 times.